Guys, welcome back to another episode of the Life Podcast of the Pod, episode 45, I think. Anyway, super pumped that you are here. It's currently windy where I'm from, and I'm going to actually talk about the wind a little bit later in the podcast, but I got to be honest with you, I hate the wind. I have a basketball hoop at my house that my little brother plays on all the time, and the wind blew it over and bent the rim to the point of no return. So I got to buy a new rim for the basketball hoop, I think. But anyway, that's besides the point. I didn't fill the bottom of it with water. I just put a couple big rocks on it. I should have known better. That one's on me. So anyway, welcome to the pod. Today, I'm excited. If you were here last week on the podcast, if you listened to the previous episode, we talked about the parable of the talents. And at my youth group, I'm a youth pastor, if you didn't know that, we're actually doing a series on the parables of Jesus. And I liked it so much, and I've been having so much fun that I thought I could bring some of that to the Life podcast because they're so applicable. The way that Jesus teaches with these parables, they just make so much sense. So I want to share some with you guys. And so today I want to look at the parable of the two builders, or you could say the two foundations. And it's not a super long story like the parable of the talents or some of the other parables that Jesus tells. Really, this is just a comparison that Jesus gives in order to convey a truth. And remember, a parable is simply a story or a quick comparison that communicates truth about who Jesus is, about what heaven's like, about what the kingdom of God is like, about what God is like. So that's all that's happening here. And so I'm just going to read it to you really quick. It's like 4 verses, and it actually happens in 2 different places. This parable is told in the book of Matthew, chapter 7, also in the book of Luke, chapter 6. And they have some different wording, but very much the same point that they are making. So I'm going to read it from the book of Matthew, chapter 7. It's like 3 verses. Here it is. It says this. This is right after actually Jesus gave his Sermon on the Mount, as it's called in the book of Matthew. And so Jesus has just given all this teaching. This is how to live your life. This is what to do about anxiety. Here's how you should treat others. Here's what you should do to pray. Here's how you should fast. Like Jesus was given the lay of the land when it comes to following him. And so then he ends this Sermon on the Mount, in the book of Matthew anyway, with this. It says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against the house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock." Not Dwayne the Rock, but the rock, who is Jesus, his teachings, his sacrifice. And every time I think of Dwayne the Rock Johnson, I just think of that picture where he's wearing that black turtleneck, gold chains. You know, it's like from the 90s or something. Great picture, by the way. Anyway, verse 26. "Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand." The same thing. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. It's a pretty self-explanatory parable per se, but it's so true. And here's the real truth that Jesus is trying to convey. That the wise man is the one who hears his words and does them. Wise is the man who hears what Jesus has to say, the sacrifice that he made for us, and follows him and obeys him and does what he asks us to do. If you fast forward to the book of James in chapter 1, James says this, "Prove yourselves doers of the word and not merely somebody who hears. An effectual doer, this man will be blessed in what he does." So it's kind of just an echo of what this parable is saying. But I just want to give you a few thoughts on this parable, what it means to build your house on the firm foundation. I'm going to title today's episode, Firm Foundation. One of my favorite worship songs right now is Firm Foundation, parentheses, He Won't, by Maverick City. I don't know if that's the one who wrote it, but that's the version that I've been listening to. And it is so good. It's literally from this parable. It says, "The rains came, a wind blew, but my house was built on you." I mean, that song could have me just in tears. It's so good. But anyway, I want to give you a few thoughts on the importance of a firm foundation. First thought is this. The wise build on the rock, and the foolish build on sand. The wise build their house on the rock, and the foolish build their house on the sand. What does this mean? Wise people build and center their lives around Jesus, ultimately around his work on the cross. But according to this parable, it's around his words. It's around his teaching. He just got done with the Sermon on the Mount and told people how to live their lives. And then he ends it with this parable and says, wise is the man who listens to my words. Wise is the man who follows my teachings. And this makes me ask the question, how do I build my life on the rock? How do I truly center myself on Jesus and the finished work on the cross? And the simple answer is this: obey Jesus. Obey his commands, obey his teachings. It feels very obvious, right? Again, the previous verses before the parable that Jesus is teaching here is he's teaching how to pray, how to fast, how to treat others. And he makes some pretty radical statements like, if anybody has anger in their heart, that's considered murder. If anybody has lust, that's considered adultery. Like, he's making these radical statements and classifying what it means to truly follow him and obey his words. And so the simple answer of building your life on Jesus and on the rock and on the firm foundation is to obey his commands. Obey his commands, his teachings. And when you build your life on the rock, this is what the parable says, that you will endure life's troubles. When you build your life on the rock, you endure the troubles. Rain fell, floods came, the wind blew, but our house, my house, was built on the rock. Therefore, when all the weather came, when the flood came, when the winds blew, my house didn't move. It stood firm because it was on the firm foundation. Jesus isn't talking about real weather and real houses, just in case we need to clear that up. But this is an incredible analogy because life is always throwing things at us. Have you ever gone through or been hit by a storm in life? Maybe you've lost somebody near and dear to you. Maybe you've been betrayed by somebody that you love. Maybe you've been diagnosed with something and there's no cure for it. Maybe you've been given unexpected news in an unexpected place. Like, what storm has life thrown at you? And the misconception is this, that many people believe when you follow Jesus that the bad times stop, that bad things won't happen to you. But the truth is that bad things will still happen to you, and that's really encouraging and reassuring. But they don't have the power to take you out like they used to. They don't have the power to put you down. They don't have the power to kill you. They actually can't do anything to you because you're on the rock. Now, you will definitely feel something, right? But it's not going to take you out. It's not going to destroy you. You're going to live to see another day. If this happened before Jesus, let's talk about these storms. If some of these storms happened before we met Jesus, I think it's safe to say that some of us wouldn't have made it through. We would have been like the house that was built on sand. We would have tumbled. We would have fallen down at the slightest breeze. We would have been done for. But I'm so thankful that many of the storms that I've endured in my life have been as I've been following Jesus, and I've been able to withstand and to endure and to make it through. All because I chose to build my house on the rock, on the firm foundation of Jesus. So if the rock is the teachings and sacrifice of Jesus, what is the sand? And the simple answer is this: the sand is literally anything else that you center your life on. All right, next point. Let's move on. No, I'm just kidding. But many of us, we don't build our house on the rock. We don't center our life around Jesus. We might call ourselves Christians, but that doesn't make us a Christian. What makes us a Christian is true life transformation. It's the fruit, right? Even just before this parable, Jesus is giving the comparison of trees and its fruit. And he says, I got my Bible right here. He says, so every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. And he says, you will know them by their fruits. Therefore, the fruit that we produce is actually just a public sign of who we are on the inside. And so many of us call ourselves Christians, but the signs on the outside, the fruit that's hanging, aren't the fruit of a true follower of Jesus. Are you catching what I'm saying? Many of us have centered our life on something else, on someone else. For many of us, it could be a spouse. Maybe we've centered our life on our marriage and on our relationship. Maybe you've centered it on a boyfriend or a girlfriend and your world just orbits around that person. Maybe you've centered your life on influence. Maybe you're trying to get as many followers and likes and comments as you possibly can, especially in today's digital era when everybody wants to be an influencer, everybody wants to be famous. Maybe you've centered your life on money, and I think many people could fall into this category. We've centered ourselves on material. We're just trying to get the next thing. We're trying to have the biggest bank account. And those things aren't necessarily bad, but they become bad when you center your life around them. That's considered sand when we centered our life on those things. Those things are but sand. And here's a good metric to gauge what foundation you've built your life on. Ask yourself this question. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you're trying to make a decision? What's the first thing that comes to mind when making any decision? And let me use payday as an example. That first, maybe you get that direct deposit, maybe you get a paper check, you take it to the bank, whatever your pay situation looks like. Where does the first portion of your money go? Does it get tithed to the church? Or is it going to a bill? Is it going to, Visa on the credit card debt? Is it going to the electricity company? Is it going to gas for the car or food? And I ask you this question because wherever that money goes, that's actually where your trust is at. It's telling you what you centered your money on. And odds are, if you've centered wherever your money goes, there your heart goes. The Bible says wherever your treasure is, there your heart is also. And so this is just a good way to gauge what's happening. If you have a big decision to make, what do you think about? Maybe there's multiple events happening at the same time. And you're like, okay, I got to figure out which event I'm going to go to. So you start to process. Are there godly morals and the teachings of Jesus centered? Like maybe I should go to this event because this one doesn't really represent this, or maybe I should go to this event and skip the church event because I want to spend time with my boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever the case might be. Where does your mind go when you have a big decision to make? Is it, what does God think of this decision? What does he want me to do? Is it what's best for me? I don't even care what God thinks. Like, where does your mind go when you have a decision to make? When something good or bad happens to you, where's the first place you want to go? Do you go to social media to tell them, hey, Instagram, Austin here, I just want to let you know somebody just gave me $1,000 and I wasn't expecting it, all these things. Or do you go to God first and say, God, thank you for this unexpected blessing? Like, where do you go first? Where does your mind go first when you have to make a decision? All those things. And here's the deal. Sand, if you still aren't able to tell where you centered your life around, sand is temporary. It moves back and forth with the wind and with the tide. If you've ever built a sandcastle on a beach close enough to where the tide goes in and out, you've watched your sandcastle get destroyed. And it's just a very sad feeling as a child to work so hard on something and for the tide to come in and destroy. In what took you an hour, it gets destroyed in a second, right? Sand is temporary. God is calling us to build our lives on the rock, on Jesus, on his teachings, on the firm foundation. Point number one and thought number one that I had was just that the wise build on the rock. I want to be wise. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a foolish. The book of Proverbs talks about the difference between being wise and being a fool. And every time I read it, I'm like, God, I don't want to be like the fool. I want to be wise. I want to love correction. I want to honor my father. And I want to be wise. So let me ask you this question. Do you want to be wise today? Or do you want to be foolish? I think all of us would say, I want to be wise. And Jesus tells us here that the wise man builds his house on the rock. The foolish builds on the sand that's going to be going away soon. It's going to fall. So that leads me to my second point is this. Second thought. The house built on sand will have a great collapse. It'll have a great fall. In the scripture, it says the rain fell and the floods came. It's about the house that was built on sand. And the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. In the book of Luke, when it writes this, it says the ruin of that house was great. Great is the collapse of the house that is built on sand. When your life is built on anything other than Jesus, on the rock, it will inevitably collapse. It is not a matter of if the wind comes, or if the rain comes, or if the flood comes. It is simply a matter of when. And if you've lived any amount of time, you know it's not always rainbows and butterflies. There will be a moment when something unexpected comes your way. And there are only two options when the storms of life hit. You'll either stand firm on the rock or you'll collapse. Because your house was either built on a firm foundation or it was built on the sand. So when the storms of life are coming your way, are they just going to wipe away all the sand that's underneath your house and you're going to fall? Humpty Dumpty built a great wall and his house, or not his house, but his fall was so great because the wall was so great. It was so big. When we build on the sand, it is only a matter of time before, I don't even know why I gave the Humpty Dumpty reference. That was weird, but it made sense in my head before I said it. But this passage says the fall will be great. And that's not great in a good way. That's great in a bad way. And here are a couple thoughts on the fall that this Bible verse is mentioning. The longer you live and build your life on the sand, the greater the collapse will be. And this is why we see professional athletes retire with millions and millions of dollars, yet they file for bankruptcy a few years later. They've spent all their money and then they file for bankruptcy and they don't know what to do with their life because they've centered their lives on sports or on money or on the things that they did. And all of a sudden, when those things are gone, they don't know who they are anymore. They've hit rock bottom. They're not able to play the sports. They don't have the money. And so they're left with nothing. And it's such a great collapse. They go from one extreme to the other simply because the longer you live and build on the sand, the greater the collapse will be. When things happen and the money ran out, they didn't know who they were anymore. And if your life isn't centered on God right now is the best time to fix that. Because the longer you live with your life built on the sand, with your life centered around something else, the greater the fall is going to be because you're constantly building. You're constantly adding and renovating and changing, if we want to use that analogy. And so the longer you live building your life on the sand, the greater the collapse will be. And here's why so many people are choosing to build their life on the sand. Here's why so many people choose to build on the sand. It's easy. It's easy to build on the sand. Any monkey can get a bucket and a shovel and go to the beach and build a sandcastle. Anybody can do it, okay? But laying a solid foundation, laying concrete, building a sturdy house, that's hard. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes resources, it takes tools, it takes other people who know what they're doing in order to lay that solid foundation. It's not easy. Therefore, so many people in today's culture are building their life on what's easy. They're trying to get rich quick. They're trying to do and follow the next trend. That's what so many people are doing because it's easy to build your life on the sand. It's easy. I remember growing up when I was in like 4th and 5th grade, we lived at this house that was on about 50 acres of property. And it was great. And like in the backyard, it wasn't really a backyard. It actually like dipped down into something that we called the pit. It was like, there was like a little bit of a backyard and then it just kind of like went down. And then like all the acreage was like right behind us, but it was like kind of down in this valley. We called it the pit. Anyway, that's beside the point. My friends and I, my brother and I, we would always go down into this pit and we would build a ton of forts out of sagebrush. Now, I live in Eastern Oregon, and so if you go anywhere in Eastern Oregon, you will see sagebrush. You'll see tumbleweeds, you'll see sagebrush. That's all there is, okay? There's not like a lot of trees. There's not like a lot of greenery. There's sagebrush everywhere. And so on this property, it was literally just hundreds of thousands of bushes of sagebrush. And we would build forts out of this sagebrush. We would pull them out of the ground. We would stack them up because they stuck together really well. We'd stack them on top of each other. We would like build these awesome like igloos and forts, and we'd have home bases. Like we would use our imaginations and have these awesome things. Now here's the other bad part about Eastern Oregon is that, like I said, it is always, always windy. And when the wind comes, it doesn't just like blow 5 miles an hour. It's like, hey, today there's going to be 30-mile-an-hour winds and your basketball hoop's going to fall down. And then so is your sagebrush fort. It's going to blow away. It's gone. It took us 3 hours to build the sagebrush fort. We enjoyed it for 5 minutes. And then the wind came and it was gone. Are you guys catching what I'm saying? When you build your house on the sand, on the temporary, without all the work, it'll blow away. It'll fall. and the collapse will be great, the Bible says. So today, I simply encourage you. Maybe there are just areas of your life that you've not yet given to Jesus. Maybe your whole life, and you're listening to this podcast, and it's not centered on the rock. It's not built on the firm foundation. And every time a storm comes, you feel like you've just been knocked to the ground. You feel like you're about to be KO'd. You feel like you can't stand back up. I would bet it's because your life isn't centered on the rock. It's not built on the rock. It's actually built on sand. It's built on the temporary. Maybe it's built on your job. It's built on what others say about you. It's built on your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or it's built on fill in the blank. If it's built on anything other than God, it's built on sand. And so today I simply just want to encourage you with this parable to build your house on the rock. Not Dwayne the Rock, but Christ the Rock. And so that's all I got for you. Build your house on the rock. I love the parables of Jesus. They just make the Bible, I feel like, so easy to digest sometimes, and it makes the some of the confusing stuff a lot easier. And it's like a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. A story just helps us a little bit more. So I'm thankful for the way that Jesus used parables to teach. It's so good. Build your house on the rock. Hey, next week, I'm probably going to be talking about parables again. I'm not sure, but I like it, so we'll probably talk about another parable. If you haven't yet, make sure you follow me on Instagram, on socials, on YouTube, TikTok, all those good places. Leave a rating if you're on Apple Podcasts. Leave a review if you're on Apple Podcasts. I think you can rate it on Spotify as well, so go ahead and do that. That stuff helps out a ton. But man, I'm so thankful for all of you that are listening to the Life Podcast. So big thank you, big shout out to you. You guys are the real MVPs. We'll see you right back here next week for another episode of the Life Podcast.